started chatting about this idea. Let's make a challah bake, a tech tribe challah bake. The first person that I thought of when I called up Meghan on the phone was Doree Shafrir. We know Doree for a very long time, back in her BuzzFeed days. But since her BuzzFeed days, she has literally gone on to write the book. Start Up a Novel is a really, really fun book about the startup scene and the different personalities involved in the startup scene. And it's a really, really fun book, which really shows the human side of a lot of very different personalities that are enmeshed in this culture. And we said, we gotta call Doree. So we called Doree, and I am so excited and honored to introduce Doree Shafrir, who came all the way from LA. And Doree is going to moderate our panel. And Doree will introduce the panel.
Okay, panelists, let's come up. Okay, so first of all, thank you all so much for coming. This is so fun. I'm so glad to be here. We have Tamar, Meghan, and Belle who are going to introduce themselves, and then we will get going.
Hi, I'm Tamar Shapiro, and I work in data science at Instagram. Before joining Instagram, I was the head of analytics here at Foursquare. And before that, I ran the analytics team for American Express and their digital division. And I love doing events like these. This is really fun for me. I have 2 kids, and we don't bake challah every week, but we do baking challah when we can. So thanks for having me.
I've already met most people. My name is Meghan Lapides. Prior to joining Foursquare 4 years ago, which is a very long time in our world, I spent most of my career at big ad agencies, Gray, Ogilvy, Ketchum, but I'm thrilled to be at Foursquare for 4 years. I'm glad you're all here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Belle Guttman. I work at Amazon Web Services. I work with a team of cloud engineers on the sales side. I've been doing that for about 10 months, which feels like maybe your 4 years. Before that, I was at a pretty big ad agency, again, for about 1.5 years. Before that, I did about 7 years or so running my own software consulting shop, which was a ton of fun. I love to bake challah with my 11-year-old daughter. And yeah, I'm super excited to be here.
Great. So just as a heads up, we're going to chat for a bit, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So please save your questions until the end. So I wanted to kind of kick things off by talking about Judaism and tech. And I'm curious how Judaism kind of manifests itself in your work lives and at your companies. So whoever wants to kind of take it away first.
So for me, given that I'm the head of HR, one of the things that I focus on a lot is diversity and inclusion. And so for me, I consider I'm an observant Jew, so I keep Shabbat and I keep kosher. And something that I'm always paying attention to is, do people have the flexibility they need to take care of religious things in their life? I think we, don't always think about that as a parameter of diversity, but I certainly do. And I told you guys already the story about the Challah Back Fridays. I also think that for me, because I'm observant and I adhere to a lot of strict, specific things, I think that it sets a certain tone for the type of person that I am. And I think, especially in HR, I think that there's like something about that for some reason that like builds trust, and people know that I stand by my principles. And when you're in HR, you're dealing with a lot of really sensitive issues. And so when people feel like you stand by your principles and you say what you mean and you do what you say, I think like it helps with accountability in difficult and hard situations.
Yeah, so for me, I went to yeshiva growing up and learned Talmud a lot. And as a data scientist, I often coach people about asking a lot of questions of the data to really get to the root of a problem. And I find that the way I tie kind of Judaism and tech and my profession together is that studying Talmud really taught me the skills of really asking a lot of questions, really getting to the root of problems and understanding, what's going on. And so I think that Talmud helped me as a data scientist in my career.
Touching on that a little bit, I would say I grew up in a pretty strict Hasidic background home, and I always wanted to be one of the guys because they had access to things like Talmud and deep study, and girls in my neighborhood never had access to that. And when I was introduced to writing code and just thinking in that way, it was the first time that I got to stretch that part of my brain, I guess, and use that part of my brain. And I was hooked from when I was 16 or 17. I will say, in my experience, part of your first question, I've generally worked in male-centric environments. I've always been the other in the sense of, because of my gender. And then I think the Jewishness and the observance level that I have and had and still have to some extent sort of added to that otherness feeling. So it's like a double compounding otherness. For the first time at Huge, which was about a year and a half ago, I was surrounded by females, which was amazing, and also other Jews, which was really nice. And yeah, I've always marveled at. I've worked in New York City for the most part, but not with as many Jews as I would have liked to see.
Yeah, that was actually going to kind of be my next question. Do you all feel like you had role models kind of coming up who were Jewish and or female?
Not me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like I didn't really either. Like I've come from more of a media and journalism background, which seems like it would have more women in senior positions than maybe, let's say, engineering. But I have only had one female boss my entire career. And that was like very early in my career. And I think there just isn't that much visibility for women in particular. And I'm wondering at your companies how you, maybe not you in particular, but how your companies are kind of working on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, so I've never had that. And I think that actually is what motivates me to keep going, especially on the bad days when I feel frustrated by the circumstances. Oftentimes people will reach out to me and tell me that I'm that role model to them, that they didn't know that, they could be a senior woman, have a family. And so, when the days are bad, that's often what keeps me motivated to keep on going.
Tamar and I have talked about this like a lot in the past. So I was the first woman along with I was the first woman along with another woman. We were put on the exec team for Foursquare for the first time. And I felt a lot of responsibility when that happened because I was like, as a woman who works at a tech company, to be on an exec team is like a big deal. And I think that one of the things that I think about all the time is how can I lift up other women? How can I support other women? Because I didn't have as many female role models as I would have liked in my career, which in HR is surprising, but at the top were a lot of men. And so even in a field where most of the people I worked with were women, but most of my bosses were men. And so I feel a really strong responsibility to be as good of a role model as I can, and reach out to young women in our company and outside of our company, host events like this, speak on different panels, because, we have to make ourselves visible. I think, your point of like not knowing who you inspire to one day be in a senior position is real. I will say most days I do not feel inspirational, but you just don't know what those moments are going to be. And I think that's what's important.
And I would say at Amazon particularly, there's a real need for more diversity, and leadership is working on that. I think it's the first time in my career where I felt like I can actually make an impact for young women in the industry. There are so few of them. I have 10 peers on my team. They're all men. We did a leadership training a couple weeks ago, and the facilitator was a female, and she walked in and she like ogled the room, and she pulled me aside and she said, like, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" And I said, "Actually, this is what I'm generally comfortable with, right? But I think I'm not unique, but I'm used to that, right?" So, but for other, especially younger women who are just coming into their careers, I think having someone who's a little more senior, who has had more experience, it's so important to have those like interactions with them, right? And just reaching out. I think I found that a little bit can go a really long way to give them those role models that we didn't have. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about work-life balance. I'm curious how, especially with children, when you're in a senior position, how that has been working for you in tech, especially in such a male-dominated environment. And do you ever feel like, do you ever feel like maybe not punished exactly, but do you feel like you're ever missing opportunities because of family obligations? And how do you kind of get around that?
I do, but those are choices that I make as my priorities. Especially in a sales organization, there are so many after-hour events and partner, drinks, and but I just have to prioritize what's more important to me. I think it does affect, and has affected my ability to sort of advance in my career as much as some of my male peers. But again, it's a choice I've made. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and yeah, I try to spend as much time as I can with her. And yeah, it's a choice I've made.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I grapple with all the time. Yeah, I think especially for me working for a California-based company with the time difference and the evenings being really important to me with my children, that's often really hard. One thing I've done, I think, well is just sort of setting boundaries and just being really clear on sort of when I work and when I don't work. And I do feel like I'm able to kind of keep up and keep on top of things, but often it requires, logging in after the kids go to bed and putting in hours at, random times. But I feel like I make it work, and whatever sort of trade-offs I make are the ones that I'm willing to, whether it's, getting a couple hours less of sleep or, missing a certain meeting at work because I want to be home in the evenings with my kids.
I'll add just a different dimension. So as someone who's an observant Jew, I leave early on Fridays for Shabbat, and I have certain holidays that I have to take off and I can't work. And I will tell you that is not easy, and I've been doing it for a long time. I definitely grapple with a lot of guilt, but I also know that I work so hard when I'm working, and I probably overcompensate and work more than I should when it is not Shabbat. So that way I am like proving myself to myself or to my boss or to our employees and my team. When you're a manager, I have 11 people on my team who report up into me. So I feel like I'm responsible to them, and I'm responsible to my executive team and my boss. And I think that, whether it's a religious obligation that you have to shut off or it's a family obligation you have to shut off, I think we all probably deal with sort of that level of guilt, but also that feeling of like, I know this is the right thing. And it's a constant battle, but at the end of the day, like, we have to be true to ourselves, and we have to do what our values tell us. And if our values tell us that Shabbat is important, or we can't go to a certain client meeting because it can't be at a kosher restaurant, or I will tell you there have been so many meetings that I've been at where we're in San Francisco and everyone's eating this like 11-course tasting menu, and I'm like opening up a like double wrapped plastic thing. It's like so embarrassing. But I think being true to your values and saying like, this is really important to me. And I think like at the end of the day, I feel really good about my decisions. And I know that like one day when I have children, like that will be my priority. And I will feel really strongly about holding to those values as well. And I think I want to believe that men have the same things, but I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I mean, it does seem like it's 20, here we are, 2019, and yet so much of this burden is still on women. I'm pregnant with my first child, and I know that a lot of this is going to end up on me because I have the more flexible schedule, and my husband works long hours, and it's just like, oh, okay, I guess I'll be the one to do this. And it just seems like we haven't reached that gender parity that I think we all thought we were going to. Meghan, I actually have a question for you about how this kind of manifests itself in terms of in terms of HR. How do you make sure that you're implementing policies across the company that make sure that people are treated equally, that you do allow for, people to have families and to have religious obligations, et cetera?
Yeah, so we have a diversity working group here, so diversity and inclusion. We also have several diversity and inclusion steering committees which run different programs, and we have employee resource groups. So when we're rolling out policies, we might share those policies with people in the D&I working group. I try to have as many eyes as possible on things, so we make sure that they're inclusive. Because you're not going to have a diverse organization unless you have an inclusive organization. And sometimes little things jump out. Like I always tell the story about, I realized one day that for our health insurance benefits, you could only take part in our infertility coverage if you were a heterosexual couple who was trying to have a baby, which meant if you were a same-sex couple, you couldn't. If you were a single woman, you couldn't use our coverage. And I just was like, huh, that's so weird. And I reached out to our brokers and I found an alternative so that now anyone in our company can use this coverage, because it's not fair that one type of employee would be able to use coverage that another type wouldn't. So sometimes you just like get an idea and you're like, huh, that's weird. I'm going to look into it. And then you have to follow those hunches and then you share it with other people. We have a fairly flexible environment where if people need to work from home for family obligations, they can. But most people come into the office because we're a very collaborative place. But we allow for flexibility for people to take care of the things that they need. I think the best way for us to ensure that our policies are inclusive is by sharing it with people of different backgrounds. Someone who is a man who's writing a policy might miss something that a woman would pick up on if she was reading. So for us at Foursquare, we just make sure we get a lot of eyes on the right things, because the way that you ensure things are diverse is by having diverse people looking at it. The same reason that you have diversity in an organization. You will create products that are made for the entire world when inside of your company looks like the entire world. And if the inside of your company looks like a lot of straight white men, or it looks like a lot of women, your products are not going to be representative of everywhere. And so I think it's about diversity and inclusion from the ground up.
Do either of you have any thoughts?
Whether religion, and we talked about this a little bit, but how religion sort of is categorized as diverse, because it's not something. I'm a hiring manager and I'm looking to hire a diverse team, but again, religion is never something that I've considered a thing to maybe look out for. I will say I peruse LinkedIn. There's like a recruiter portal for finding good candidates, and sometimes I bias towards just a picture. Don't tell my employer that I do that, but if I see a diverse photo, like a female or person, underrepresented, minority, I sort of get excited at that. And then every now and then I'll see, I think from a religious perspective, from looks, I've only been able to detect like Hasidic men, right? And every now and then, like I'll see out of the 75 that I'm looking through, there's maybe one or two. And I think, wouldn't it be nice to have like somebody like that on our team? And I try to bring them in and interview them, as well as other, qualified candidates for sure. It's really hard to have a diverse team.
Diversity does not happen by accident. Inclusion does not happen by accident. You don't stumble into a diverse company. It's just not how it works. You have to really be actively trying to make a company inclusive, and you have to be actively trying to make a company diverse. It's just a fact.
Yeah, and I mean, in my experience, it doesn't stop with just hiring diverse candidates. You then have to make sure that they feel included in the workplace, and it's an ongoing thing. It doesn't just stop when you hire them.
Belonging is, if people don't feel like they belong, they leave. Belonging is a intense human need we all have, whether we think about it actively or not. The feeling like you don't belong makes you not want to be somewhere. And if you don't have a place that's inclusive, you're not going to want to stay. And so I think it's incumbent on employers to create inclusive environments where people feel belonging.
Yeah. What advice would you all give to women who are maybe in a junior position at a tech company who want to kind of rise through the ranks?
Oh, so many. I mean, my general philosophy on career growth is really to focus on the things that you feel are your strengths, and not to try to change yourself or try to be something else or try to develop areas that you're just never going to sort of naturally be really good at. And so knowing what are the things that you're passionate about, what are the things that you feel like you're good at and you want to get even better at, and finding your path through that.
I give advice all the time to junior women and men, but I say, ask. Always ask. No ask, no get. I've never lived in a world where anyone has given me anything. Everything I've ever had is because I've asked for it. Ask for the raise. If you don't get the raise, ask why. Ask for the promotion. Ask for goals. If you don't get the promotion, find out why. If you didn't achieve your goals, talk about it. Have the conversations. You're not going to make yourself a pain. You're going to make yourself your advocate. In an ideal world, we all have a manager who does that for us, but we don't live in an ideal world. And I have had a total of one manager who's advocated for me in 19 years of working. So I encourage everyone to advocate. I encourage everyone to ask. I encourage all of you to encourage other women to advocate and ask and manage your careers because you're the only one who's going to do it.
Kind of the same. I would say a strength-based approach is really something that I've recently adopted, and it's super helpful. I know in my career I kept trying to get better at the things that I just either just wasn't good at or didn't want to do, and it causes a lot of stress and anxiety. And then I realized that there are some things that I do really well, and to try to build that up and get better in those areas, and then teach other people about how I did that. And the ask thing is huge. Like by the time I figured that out, I think it was like 5 minutes ago, right? Like no one's going to do that for you, and you just have to ask. And we know, statistically women are less likely to ask. There's this statistic, and I shouldn't be throwing numbers around if I can't back it up with data, but I read somewhere that a man is likely to apply for a position if he feels something like maybe 80% or less confident that he can do the job, whereas women need like 105% confidence that they can actually do the job, which is crazy.
I read something recently where if there's 10 qualifications for a job, a man will apply if he has 3 of them, and a woman will only apply if she has all of them. I think we have to know that about ourselves, and we have to know that we may not advocate for ourselves. We may not do it, and we have to consciously be thinking like, should I be asking? Should I be doing this? Or just apply for the job? Like you have nothing to lose. Again, no ask, no get, just go for it.
What advice would you give someone who maybe either wants to be observant as an observant Jew in the workplace or is but doesn't feel comfortable kind of being out about it? How would you suggest kind of broaching those conversations?
Okay, that's me again. So it's a tough one. I think being yourself ultimately is respected. I think that I tell people during the interview process that I'm Sabbath observant, and it's always like the scary moment. But the truth is if they're scared off by that, then that's not a place I want to work anyway. And I really believe in, as an HR person, creating an environment where people can bring themselves to work as they are. And so I always encourage people to be themselves. And I will answer questions for people. Like I don't actively go out and say, did you know Rosh Hashanah is coming up? Can I tell you about this holiday? But like when people ask me questions, I answer them. And the first time I sent out my Challah Back Friday email, I was scared, but like everyone loves it and it's fine. And I think just being yourself, whether you're a mom or a woman or you're gay or you're an observant Jew, like I just really believe in being yourself and just if you're comfortable with yourself, then like other people are probably going to be comfortable with you too. Probably not everyone, but like then I don't want those people in my life anyway. And if I'm at a company where they're not appreciative of me being myself, then I also don't want to be at that company. And I'm glad that if I find it out, I'm glad I found it out.
Before we get to questions, is there anything else that anyone wants to mention? Love a fun tip.
So I lived as a closeted observant Jew for a long time in my career. I would sneak out on Fridays, always like heart pounding, hoping nobody notices. I did that for many years until I don't quite remember what it was that helped me change, but I just decided to own my observance. And something fun that I did was, because my teammates would make fun of me sometimes about all the days that I took off. Is that another Jewish holiday? There happens to be a website, istodayajewishholiday.com. It's amazing. It's, it gives you the information that your peers need to validate that you're not actually making stuff up. Yeah, and I'll say one more thing. Also, like in interviews, you mentioned earlier, I've always hidden the fact that I'm observant and I need to either leave early Fridays or work from home. And I would wait to get the offer letter and then be like, oh, by the way, just want you to know. And At Huge, which is about 2 years ago or so, it was the first time I sort of came out and said, listen, I'm Sabbath observant and I need to be home, either work from home Fridays or leave early. And just sort of owning it and saying it out loud made me, I think it's on me more than the people I'm around, right? I don't think people care really for the most part. So that's something that really helped me.
I will add that I'm pretty sure I care more than other people, and I'm more nervous and weirded out by me leaving on early on Fridays than anyone on my team is. Like it's me, it's not them.
That's because most people are just worried about themselves. Okay, so we're going to open it up for questions. Is there someone who can carry a mic around for people to ask? Chana?
I actually didn't think of this until we were talking about diversity, but I also hear a lot that people want people to fit in the company culture, right? So how do you balance having something diverse because it feels like it's contradictory to a culture, having a culture?
A culture should include diversity. A culture isn't about, do I want to have a beer with this person or do I want to hang out with this person? It's like, do we have the same vision for the work that we're doing? It's about like, these are the company's core values, and like, I'm down with these core values. It's not about like, let's hang out after work and like have a beer. And so I think when you hire for values, you build a culture where people can come as they are.
Hello. I'm curious to hear from one or more of you if you're willing to share a story about a time when you fought for yourself and won in a work environment.
I need a second.
I was actually talking to somebody about this today. There's somebody, junior, this is her first job, who we were at a conference in Vegas last week, and somebody super senior to her came on to her in an uncomfortable way, and she wasn't expecting it. So I actually shared this story earlier today already, so I guess I can share it again if it's out there in the world. I've had numerous instances, given that I work in a male environment, where generally my manager or somebody more senior to me took advantage of the situation. And there have been numerous times where I just let it go because I don't want to be the complainer. I didn't want to be the only woman who's, in the company, but also complaining about the guys, right? I wanted to be like one of the guys. But there was one time where I had a manager who he'd come over to my desk and massage my shoulders because he said I looked really stressed out. This went on for a number of weeks. My peers would, like, we use this internal messaging tool, and they would message me and say, "Hey, Belle, Steve's on his way over." And I can only imagine how all the other guys sort of, maybe, I don't know if they laughed at that. Maybe that's not being, kind to them, but nobody ever stood up for me. And I told my manager again numerous times I was uncomfortable, or like, my back's not really hurting, kind of giggling. I was like super junior, and I thought maybe this is normal. Maybe this is what you have to do as a female in a male-centric world. But I finally escalated it, and I went to his manager, who was a woman. I think maybe that's what helped. But I spoke with her. I was super, super nervous about it, and it turns out that it wasn't the first time somebody complained about him, and he got fired. And so that was a good outcome.
I'll just share a slightly different story. It wasn't until I started managing people that I realized some of the differences that Meghan talked about in terms of women advocating for themselves relative to men. And prior to that, anytime I got like a promotion or a raise, whatever my manager gave me, I was like, just said thank you and took it and was happy with my compensation. And then it wasn't until I started managing a team and had men on my team who felt very comfortable kind of walking into my office and saying, I think I deserve a raise or promotion or whatever it was. And actually, to be fair, like, observed their approach and, thought it was actually really smart how they, put a case together for themselves about why they felt they deserved whatever it was that they were asking for, a very logical, very rational way of going about it. And I started to recognize that there were women on my team who were not doing the same for themselves, and often this is what helps some of the men on my team get ahead. And it was interesting to watch this as a manager and then start to learn for myself, that I needed to be advocating and also asking for myself for the things that obviously my peers were doing this, and I should just feel more comfortable doing it as well.
Hi. So this is like a twofold question a little bit. So I'm the only Jew in my office. There's some in other locations, but in New York, I'm the only one and the only observant Jew in the company. So I'm like the company rabbi. Like people come to me and I'm like, I don't always know the answers. I'm not, and some Jews will like confess to me. I'm like, I don't care if you don't eat kosher. It really doesn't bother me. And I feel so the two-part question is I feel like sometimes that's all I'm seen for. Like I have other interests, I have other talents. Yes, being observant is a huge part of my life. Yes, I leave early on Fridays, but like when there's like someone who comes in, let's say from another office who doesn't know me so well, like they don't really know what to talk about with me. It's like, all right, so you bake challah or something. And I feel like sometimes I'm not shy about it. I'm very open, but I don't want that to be like my main thing. But on the flip side, I feel like I do work in a very accepting, inclusive environment. They always order me kosher food. They're really nice to me. I can't complain, but there are definitely groups that are like more vocal. Like we just had lunch and learn for Black History Month, but there's no lunch and learn for like anti-Semitism month, So how do I like so on one hand, I want to like push for like you should know more about Jews, and on the other hand, I'm like, but I don't want to be like obsessive about it. Does that question make sense? Like like on the one hand, I don't want to like blow it out of the water. On the other hand, I don't want it to be not spoken about at all.
Just be yourself. That's it. Like as someone who has many times, including now, been the only. Actually, there are some people who are observant, but like I think because of my position, I'm very visible. So I do also sometimes feel the burden or sometimes the gift of being the person who gets to explain what things mean. I always am clear when I don't know something and I find out. And like sometimes I want to talk about it, and sometimes I'm like I also like music. Like let's talk about that. I think I am very vocal about my other interests as well. And so like people know that I'm obsessed with Beyonce, or that like I go to everyone who knows me is laughing, or that I go to the beach like every second that I can. So I think like having other interests and talking about those too alleviates some of the burden of like this thing that people want to know about. Like people will definitely be like, oh, so let's say you're on a boat and it's like Shabbat and Shabbat's coming. And like, what do you do? I'm like, I don't know. I wouldn't be on a boat right before Shabbat. Also, I love boats because they're near the beach. When was the last time you went to the beach? Like, I have other things that I'm interested in. And so I'll talk about those things too. And I think it's like, just be yourself. Like, I'm sure you have other interests besides being Jewish. So, like, share those things too.
Right. But like, how do you get like this is a nice event that you're like having at your company. Like, how would I like, how do you do it in the right way?
Yeah.
It's like
So,
obviously we're championing a cause like Black History Month, but like you're gonna champion Jews. Like, what are we championing?
yeah. So, like, I bake my challah on Fridays, and we do something just like we do something for like other holidays. Like, we bring in different foods for our lunches. Like, we do something special for Rosh Hashanah. Like, we don't like, there isn't necessarily a Jewish history month to my knowledge. So I don't really like share that. But when there are holidays, I bring things in and I share it. I'm like, oh, it's Rosh Hashanah. I brought in apples and honey. Or like the challah that I baked for Rosh Hashanah is like streusel or chocolate chip or whatever. I think like just do the things that are important to you. And if you feel strongly about like creating a situation where you're advocating for Jews in your work environment, like it will increase the focus on you being Jewish. So I think it's like, and that could be good, like that could be what you want. And I think you have to decide for you specifically where the balance is.
Thank you.
So you all had talked about gender and advocacy,
And I'm wondering if you notice as managers generational differences in the way that your employees may advocate for themselves. I've noticed it not as much in terms of the way that people advocate for themselves, but more so in the way that they approach their work and sort of the purpose that they have in sort of what they're doing. And so I do find that some of the younger individuals on my team have to feel sort of a different level of fulfillment from the work that they're doing, whether it be that they're learning a new skill or they believe sort of in the mission or sort of like bigger purpose of some of the work that they're doing. And that just often doesn't seem as important to some of the older people on my team. And there's other motivating factors there. I mean, some of this is also correlated to their life stage. And so for some of the older people, it's more about work-life balance or other things that matter sort of in terms of like, compensation, things that like they need sort of in their life that is beyond some of the things that some of the younger people need to feel fulfilled at their work.
I think I've seen generationally. I can't speak to the gender difference. I have 12 men and one woman now on my team. But I think, I often I'm talking to the folks on my team, and I'm struck by both their confidence, but also their ownership of their own success. So they seem to be much more vocal about what they want and what they need to get there. I sometimes marvel at like if only I got to do this 20 years later. I don't think things would be that different, but I definitely do see a little bit of a difference in the generations with. But I also agree that there is a different sense of fulfillment for them. It's learning for sure is a big one, and the time for personal lives is just as important for this generation as it is for us. And
Hi, I just wanted to let everybody know that there actually is a Jewish American Heritage Month, and it's in May. So if you have diversity programs at your companies that you recognize, you can start planning now.
Any other questions? Okay, let's thank our panel. Thank our esteemed panel. And we're going to go back to our dough. All right, we're going to continue. Normally we use water that's a little bit warm and we wait till we see a little bit more of an activation. However, this challah is going to have two chances to rise. Number one, when we have the panel, and number two, when you take it home. So we're going to continue. We're going to pour our egg into what's going to be our dough. Eggs symbolize hope and the future, and egg is, opportunities in the future. And our oil is the fat, what enriches life, etc. And salt. Salt I want to talk about a little bit more. So in goes the oil. Now salt. I had spoken quite a bit about sugar, as sugar is the sweetness of life. We all want sweetness. So my question is, what is salt? Salt you think is the opposite of sweetness, but when you have a little bit of salt, it really enhances your meal. It brings out all the flavors in what you're eating. Too much salt is extremely problematic. Your meal is ruined. Salt represents, we say gevura in Hebrew, which could be severity. And that doesn't sound like a good thing. Severity, it seems a little bit scary. However, if you think about it, severity is necessary in many aspects of life and in many relationships. Any relationship is about a give and a take. If it's only giving, if it's only the chesed, the kindness, the sugar, it's not a good relationship. We need a give and a take. Also, when you think about severity, you could think about a door closing, which doesn't sound particularly nice to think about a door closing. However, there are times in life and in relationships when we need privacy. So the door is actually a great chesed, a great kindness to allow us to have that privacy. So we're putting everything in, and now we're stirring, stirring, stirring with our spoon. Once everything is mixed, then we're going to open the flour. You're going to put in about 3 1/3 cup of flour, about half a bag. There is a bag of flour for 2 people. You should have a bag of flour on one side or on the other. Please share with the person that you're sitting next to. If anybody needs more flour, we have plenty more, so please just raise your hand, and we have volunteers that are helping out. Now we're gonna slowly add the flour, 3 1/3 cup, and we're gonna stir, stir, stir with our spoons. Once this looks a little bit less like a liquid and a little bit more like a dough, then we can start kneading with our hands. How's it going? How's it going with the dough? We're going to continue adding flour until we knead by hand. And then we're going to knead until we have a nice ball of dough. I could show you my ball of dough. A ball of dough that is no longer sticky. But take your time. We've got time to make the dough. Is anyone done yet? Okay. We have volunteers circulating to help.